In 2006, the chaos and fear caused by the burst of the dot-com bubble had long since passed. Silicon Valley was once again attracting great interest from Wall Street and its investors. Newcomers like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey were making America proud again. But on the other side of the Atlantic, a presentation was taking place. Elisabeth Holmes, a 22-year-old CEO of THERANOS, was presenting her product to Novartis, the Swiss drug-making giant. Her invention, a mini lab capable of performing over 200 blood tests with just a single prick. The presentation went well, and the audience was impressed. But what the Novartis executives didn't know was that the entire presentation was a scam. Elisabeth Holmes was born in a family with a glorious past.
She was a descendant of the Fleischmann Yeast dynasty. Fleischmann Yeast Company is a company that was created in the late 1800s by two Hungarian immigrants. And 20 years later, by the turn of the 20th century, the Fleischmanns and the Holmeses became one of the richest families in America.
Unfortunately, the family fortune was gradually squandered due to the inability of Charles Louis Fleischmann descendants to live up to the legacy of their illustrious ancestor. Elisabeth's father, Chris Holmes, was a man who held numerous leadership positions in various government agencies, including USAID, for example. He loved to share stories about his family with his daughter and never missed an opportunity to remind her of the importance of building something meaningful. The young girl was in complete agreement with her father on this point. However, for her, building something also meant becoming rich.
A relative at a family gathering when she's 9 or 10 asks her, what do you want to do when you grow up? Pretty much the question everyone is asked when they're a kid at some point or another. And she says, I want to be a billionaire. And she's not kidding around, she's looking really intent. These aren't the idle words of a child.
Yeah.
And the relative says, well, don't you want to be president? And she says, no, because I'll have $1 billion and so the president won't want to marry me.
Yeah. Elisabeth spent much of her childhood in Washington, D.C., before moving to Houston, where her father had just accepted a new job. In Houston, she enrolled at St. John's School, the most prestigious private school in the city. At school, Elisabeth wasn't the typical teenager who idolized pop singers or even handsome movie stars. Her idol wasn't a pop star. It was Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, and incidentally, one of the richest men in the world. Driven by her desire to succeed, Elisabeth Holmes threw herself into her studies, staying up late at night to review her lessons. Her hard work paid off. She became one of the top students in her class, earning her a spot at the prestigious Stanford University. At Stanford, Elisabeth Holmes enrolled in chemical engineering because in her mind, this field would allow her to make a positive impact on people's lives, while also giving her the chance to start a business that could actually make her a billionaire. At Stanford, Elisabeth Holmes blended in perfectly with the crowd. She led a normal student life and even attended campus parties from time to time. She was also in a relationship with a sophomore student. But Elisabeth was different from the other students. No one worked as hard as she did. No one was as curious in class. And most importantly, Elisabeth already had a business idea in her mind. She met with a medical professor and shared her idea, a patch that could be placed on the skin to monitor what was happening in the blood in real time. Upon hearing this, the medical professor thought it was impossible. She laughed to herself, thinking it was the typical idea of a freshman girl who, after taking a few university courses, already believed she knew everything. But that didn't faze Elisabeth Holmes at all. In her mind, nothing and no one could stop her from achieving her goals. It is actually a pretty typical trait of entrepreneurs. They have a vision and stick to it, even if it means being seen as crazy by others. After her setback, Elisabeth continued refining her idea. It was no longer a patch, but a small device.
Its product was a device that was going to enable you to run the full range of laboratory tests off just a drop or two of blood from a finger.
On paper, the idea was brilliant and had all the potential to revolutionize the pharmaceutical industry. After all, pharmaceutical companies spend billions of dollars each year testing new drugs, and having the ability to streamline these tests could have been a game changer. At least, that was what the man who would become Elisabeth's mentor thought. When Elisabeth sat down in Channing Robertson's office and shared her idea, he couldn't help but proclaim it a stroke of genius. Robertson had been teaching at Stanford since the 1970s. He was a 69-year-old man, tall and charismatic, who loved wearing leather jackets, and he had a unique ability to connect with his students, like few professors could. He was also the most prominent figure in the chemical engineering department. He should have seen that something was off, but he had far too many stars in his eyes to face the truth. In fact, Professor Robertson's behavior is somewhat understandable. Sometimes we can be so mesmerized by a beautiful woman that we refuse to see her flaws. He genuinely believed that Elisabeth was a sort of Beethoven, and that he was dealing with the next Steve Jobs. Winning over Robertson was merely the first step in a long journey, where Elisabeth, like a snake charmer, would captivate and persuade a host of wealthy and influential old men. Robertson connected Elisabeth with a PhD student, an Indian guy named Shonak Roy, who at the time was working on enzymes that could improve laundry detergents. Shonak agreed to work with Elisabeth, even though he had some doubts about the feasibility of the project. But, seeing Channing Robertson's enthusiasm, he thought it might just work. Besides, the idea of starting a company appealed to him, so he agreed to become THERANOS' very first employee. When Elisabeth decided to file the paperwork to create her company, the first thing she did was break up with her boyfriend at the time. The reason? She was starting a business and wouldn't have time for a relationship that could distract her. In the fall of 2003, Elisabeth dropped out of Stanford.
I was at a point where another few classes in chemical engineering was not necessary for what I wanted to do.